All right, we are going into the basement of the house next to the Lizzie Borden house because this was actually the original Lizzie Borden murders. And I'll tell you about that. Elizabeth Borden killed two of her three kids before the actual Lizzie Borden murders. And this is the house, and it was occupied by a doctor next door, and he actually testified in the trial. And it is now the coffee house.
This was Dr. Kelly's office. He was the Irish Catholic doctor who lived next door. And everything here is pretty much still intact. The fireplace is same one. The woodwork is all has all been preserved since 1892. As you can tell, people were much shorter then.
Yeah, we were talking about that.
The flooring is original. Everything here is original, like I said, with the exception of the electrical outlets. Some of the metal brackets on the shelves, but this is where the doctor would have had all of his medicine and whatnot, and this is where he would treat his patients. They would go right through his house, come into the basement, and he would basically take care of everybody here. And I was actually surprised when I took the building because I didn't realize that they had preserved, this all these years, and it was really amazing. It was really nice of them. It was wonderful, but it is a beautiful room.
It is. These floors
The
are gorgeous.
woodwork is unbelievable.
Yes.
And over here,
Now, and this is his desk, or no?
no,
Okay.
I actually purchased all those the furniture separately. There was nothing here.
What is gorgeous.
Yeah.
The lights flickering, Audrey. What'd you do?
Oh Lord. Somebody filled the senses down here.
In 1848, Eliza Borden. This door is original. The stairs are original. The rafters are original. In 1848, Eliza Borden took her children for the last time down these steps here. There was a small cistern, small well here. It was only about that deep. And she drowned two of her children right here. And then she came over here and she slit her own throat. Her body was found right here. And she had killed herself, all due to what they call melancholia, which today would be postpartum depression.
Wow. So are the stairs still back there?
Yes, that goes up to the coffee shop, yeah.
Nice. So you're a history buff?
Yes.
I can kind of feel it. I love it.
Well, I've always been fascinated with Fall River history. And, it's just, of course, it's where I'm from. So I didn't tell you before, but I'll tell you now. Let me ask you this. Do you think Lizzie Borden was guilty or innocent?
Yes.
I think she probably did.
I think she probably did it, but I think she had a reason. I don't know if he was abusive. And, the wife, and I don't know how to feel about the wife, because you can say, well, the wife let him get away with it. But back then, what is the wife going to do, really, But apparently, in my opinion, I think she at least found fault with the wife, stepmom. Or maybe it was just a stepmom thing, and he was abusive and lost two birds. What do you think?
I think 100% innocent.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, who do you think did it?
A complete victim of the circumstances. Uncle John Morse was the one who brought in an assassin. He had a perfect alibi. He made sure he was out of the house. He brought in an assassin. The assassin was the one that actually committed the crime and got away with it. There was not enough time for Lizzie Borden to have committed the crime. Especially the murder of the father. When the police showed up, his blood was still oozing.
Oh, wow.
Which meant that his heart had just stopped pumping. That murder had just occurred. She did not have the time to clean herself off, to hide anything. She just didn't have the time. Not only that, if you're smart enough to have committed those 2 murders and clean yourself off and hide a hatchet and be able to alert the authorities, and yet your alibi is you're eating pears in the barn, you could have very simply just walked out the door, gone downtown, gone shopping, and when you came back, oh my God, what happened? I wasn't home. Her story wasn't anything but the truth, because anyone who had committed that crime could have made up a much better alibi than I was eating pears in the barn.
Yeah.
Lizzie Borden inherited, her and her sister inherited what would be equivalent today to between $18 and $25 million.
Good Lord.
Andrew Borden was a very wealthy man. The Fall River Police, the truth of the matter is the real reason why the police decided to pin it on Lizzie Borden, it was a political and economical reason. Several days after the murder, they went to the DA and the mayor. And now, mind you, I don't trust police investigations. Just a ghost.
Motion. I was going to say.
I don't trust police investigations today, never mind 130 years ago. Back then, there was no FBI. There was no state police. Your local police department was it. And the criteria for becoming a police officer back then, you just had to know somebody. There was no police academy that you would attend. So what really happened was the police went to the mayor and the DA several days after the crime. And they said, the public is calling for justice. And we literally have over 100 people that we have to investigate all over the country. It's as if this guy had people waiting in a line to kill him. He was very hated. As a matter of fact, when the police went to the front door and announced to the gathering crowd that he had been butchered, a hip hip hooray went up. People started celebrating.
Wow.
Someone brought in a brass band to play.
Wow.
It became like a carnival atmosphere.
Oh my gosh.
And L. Frank Baum, who at the time was writing The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, read that in a paper and used that as his inspiration for the Munchkins celebrating the death of the Wicked Witch. Art imitating life. So the DA and the mayor decided this is going to bankrupt our city investigating this. Nothing like this has ever happened before. So they made a political and an economical decision. They decided that since what they knew was there was only 2 people in the house that they knew of, Lizzie or the maid. There was just as much circumstantial evidence against the maid as there would be against Lizzie. So they decided if they blame it on the maid, she's probably going to hang, because she's Irish Catholic. She's probably going to hang. But if they blame it on Lizzie, they knew she wouldn't be found guilty, and she would be let free, and then the city didn't spend any money. So it was the cheaper way and the easier way to get out. Blame it on her, justice is satisfied, the public's satisfied, and then we don't have to do anything with this anymore. They literally had people they had to investigate in Colorado, people in California, people in Texas that had done business with this guy who wanted him dead. So they decided to pick on her. She'll be found not guilty, and that's it. To ensure a not guilty verdict, she hired the former governor of Massachusetts, George Robinson, as her lead attorney. When George Robinson was governor, he had appointed his best friend and law partner to the Massachusetts trial bench, a fellow by the name of Mason, and who happened to be the chief judge at Lizzie Borden's trial was the same fella, Mason. And of course there were no conflict of interest laws back then. But Lizzie Borden's attorney had appointed him as the judge at her trial. So which way do you think it's going to go?
Yeah.
The jury came back in less than a minute with a not guilty verdict. But the judge said, well, that looks a little too suspicious, so go back and wait an hour. And they had lunch and they waited, and then they came back. So everyone knew she would be found not guilty. She probably wasn't sure, but I think her attorneys and the rest of the authorities knew she would be found not guilty.
Wow.
That's the real reason why they picked on Lizzie Borden. And 1 week before she died, she gave an interview to the New York Times, and they asked her, if you didn't do it, do you know who did? And she said, I think I do. And they said, well, will you let us know? She said, absolutely not. They said, why? She says, because just in case I'm wrong, I don't want that person accused unfairly the way I was. She said, besides, it's up to the police and the DA. They have the evidence. Let them decide. And then she passed away. I believe she meant it to be John Morse, her uncle, because after her trial, after she was found not guilty, neither her nor her sister ever allowed John Morse to visit them ever again, even though that was their real mother's brother. He received an $8 million settlement from a farm, what would be equivalent to $8 million today, from a farm that he had with Andrew in Westport, which Andrew wouldn't let him have the money from the farm, and they had a terrible argument the night before. So I think it's safe to say that John Morse brought in an assassin, and the assassin was the one that actually committed the crime.
And I think you just changed my mind. I
Well,
think I'm going to agree with you on that.
There
Yeah.
was never
Believable.
Right,
the reason why the police, the DA, and even Lizzie's attorneys went with the narrative of the mother being murdered first, because there was never any proof that the mother was murdered first. But the reason why they went along with that narrative was because if she were murdered after Andrew, if it were proven that she were murdered after Andrew, then what would happen is her family would have received between $18 and $25 million.
Ah, yeah.
So the reason why Lizzie's attorneys told her, we're going to go along with the story that she was murdered first, was so that through rites of passage, his daughters would receive his entire estate.
She would already be dead first.
She would already,
then,
exactly, yeah.
Oh,
So that's why they went along with that story.
That
So I've always been the type that I don't take anything at face value. I try to look at it and figure things out a little differently. I've always thought a little differently than most people. So I've always felt most people in Fall River believe Lizzie Borden was guilty because if the police charge someone, most people still today, most people think if the police charge someone with a crime, there's a reason for it. Not understanding the political and economical reasons why someone of that stature would be charged with that crime. So, there's a lot more going into it than just, someone who's been abused or someone who, has a hatred of her stepmother and everything like that. And the thing that always struck me was the amount of money and power that this guy had. And he had a tremendous amount of enemies. I mean, in business, and it was a much different time in America. Like, for instance, he owned a Swansea farm with 23 employees, and most of his employees were Portuguese Catholics. He wouldn't hire Portuguese, so he told them, if you want to work for me, you have to change your name to English names. So they all did, because he would not allow a Portuguese to work for him. And they couldn't discuss their Catholicism. Much different time in America.
Yeah. Well, and I didn't know you said the doctor witnessed him going in, and 8 minutes
Yes.
later, Lizzie coming out
Yeah.
screaming.
Yeah.
And 8 minutes, she wouldn't have time
Yeah.
to do anything.
That's always been debated, and people have always, tried to interject things into, it couldn't have been 8 minutes, had to be like this, had to be like that. Dr. Kelly, first of all, Dr. Kelly thought, as his family did, that Lizzie was probably guilty. But, he said he wasn't sure because he didn't think that anybody could do that in 8 minutes. So, one never knows.
Right.
She could have done it. Absolutely. I believe absolutely she could have done it. But even in 8 minutes, even in 1 minute, I think she could have done it. But I also believe that given all the other circumstances and all the other people that wanted him, off this planet, I think, chances are, it's almost as if there were people waiting in a line.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
just
but
to
your
kill this
theory
guy.
Yeah.
And
more
I've
than
always
holds
felt
water.
that the
Yeah.
stepmother was collateral damage. What a lot of people don't know, you've seen the crime scene photos. Those were the first crime scene photos ever taken in the United States, second to Jack the Ripper in England, in the world. The mother's body was actually found under the bed, not on the side of the bed. It was actually found under the bed. But what happened was Dr. Bowen pulled her out from under the bed. And you would say to yourself, how did her body end up under the bed? Did someone kill her and then push her under the bed? No. What happened was she was killed on the spot that she laid. So the bed had to have been moved. My theory is that John Morse brought in an assassin, hid him in the fireplace behind the bed, the fireplace there. And the assassin pushed the bed out. She came into the room. He killed her. And then realizing the bed was askew and everyone would know that he had hidden in the fireplace, pushed the bed back over her body. And then he went downstairs and killed Andrew. I believe she was murdered first, and I believe it was within probably a minute or so. He killed her, went downstairs and killed Andrew. And when the police got there, they took both bodies, put them on the dining room table, laid them out. 4 hours later, a photographer shows up. And someone said, all right, let's take pictures. Let's put the bodies back and let's take pictures. So they repositioned the bodies where they thought they were.
Oh my goodness.
So the crime scene photos are deceiving. They're quite deceiving.
Wow.
And even Dr. Bowen said, I don't think his body was really laying like that. I remember him sitting up higher. And but the police said, well, whatever, we're just taking pictures. So it's quite deceiving. So it's a lot different, than what it's been portrayed to be, as most things are. Later on, Lizzie Borden financed Franklin Roosevelt's campaign for governor of New York and later for the presidency of the United States. If not for Lizzie Borden, Franklin Roosevelt there would be no Wizard of Oz, like I told you, and there would be no Franklin Roosevelt. No one would even have heard of Franklin Roosevelt. Wow. On her deathbed, her cousin Lewis Howe was at her deathbed with her, and she told him, I'm leaving you my entire estate. And whatever you do, make sure my great friend Franklin gets elected to whatever he wants to get elected to. This is 1927. 1928, Franklin Roosevelt decides to run for governor of New York. And his great friend Lewis Howe, who ended up being his campaign manager, his chief of staff, and his best friend, says, let's tap into Aunt Lizzie's money. And they tapped into her money, and they got him elected governor of New York. A few years later, 1932, he decides to run for president. And they said, let's tap into Lizzie's money, which by that time had grown to about $40 million in today's money. And they used her money to finance his presidential campaign, which would be equivalent to O.J. Simpson financing a presidential campaign. No campaign finance laws either back then. And what actually happened was when Franklin Roosevelt was elected president, him and Eleanor gave a few interviews, and they had both said, it's too bad their great friend Lizzie Borden hadn't survived, because they would have loved to have had her over for tea at the White House, and they probably would have had a special room for her to stay over. Both Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt were of the same status as Lizzie Borden, and they loved her. And Lewis Howe, her cousin, he's buried at Oak Grove Cemetery. Have you been to the cemetery?
We haven't.
I have a pamphlet upstairs. I'll give it to you. You can check it out. Once you get to the cemetery, just follow the white arrows in the road, and it'll take you right to the Borden plots. But Lewis Howe, who was Lizzie's cousin, defended her to reporters. After she died, he defended her incessantly. He said, no, she was a wonderful woman. She was great. And I often tell people, if Charles Manson had left me $30 million, I would have defended him too.
Yeah.
Right.
So, money's pretty good,
Well, let me tap in on your wealth of knowledge for one last question, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
We were discussing it, and I'm obviously just skim history.
Yeah.
You are history.
Oh, thank you.
After the murders, I know she bought the more expensive house.
Yes, Maplecroft.
How was she treated? Was she ostracized? I've read that she had big parties, but not necessarily was still accepted by the community
She was
anymore.
never accepted again by the community. She couldn't even go to church without people moving away from her. So she decided not to go. You have to understand, in Lizzie Borden's day, the only form of mass media was newspapers. And she was on the cover of every newspaper in the country. In Lizzie Borden's day, I can only, compare it to, she was as famous as a Kardashian, if you can imagine that. But she had a lot of money, and I think she tried to make up for, her notoriety by when she would have a party, she didn't think anything of spending $100,000 in today's money on a party. She bought the mansion on French Street. She was one of the first people in Fall River to own an automobile, and it wasn't just an automobile, it was a limousine.
Wow.
With a livery driver, chauffeur, and she had special seats in the back for her dogs to be able to sit up and look out the windows. She was quite an eccentric, and she had a lot of money. She ended up having a torrid love affair with one of the members of her jury who found her not guilty. And when his wife found out about it, she divorced him, and she listed Lizzie Borden as the reason for the divorce because he was frequenting Maplecroft.
So she is like a Kardashian.
Yeah, oh yeah. Also, there's a love letter somewhere written by her to this gentleman from Swansea, Mr. Gardner, Thomas Gardner, who they were engaged to be married, but once the press found out about it, she decided to call it off because she didn't want to put him through all of that. And there was a beautiful love letter that she wrote him, apologizing for, the press and everything, but she would have to call off, the engagement. So I think, it's, in one way it's a lonely life, but in another way, I think it's, it's a lot, it's 50-50. She had quite a sense of humor. When kids would go and sing Lizzie Borden Took an Axe, Gave them in front of her house, she would invite them in for milk and cookies. So she was quite sweet, quite nice to people. Also, she bought homes for all of her servants all around Maplecroft. And she also financed over 100 college educations over all the years. She never again displayed any type of, psychotic behavior.
Her sister moved off, correct?
Her sister moved off, about 12 years before they both passed away, within 10 days of one another. The sister had moved out, and, people speculate, it's because of this, it was because of that. If you had to live with your sister all those years, and you both have all this money, after a while you're going to say to yourself, I'm sick of you, I'm leaving. And I couldn't live with my brother, for a long period of time either. So, and we're not rich, so, that's it. Of course it would be messy because he's dead now, so, I couldn't live with him like that. It would smell up the place.
A little bit, yeah.
But, no, and afterwards her sister gave several interviews and explained that the reason for moving was just, she got sick of living with her sister, and they had plenty of money, so it really didn't matter. It was a much different time in America. These were people of status. These were people that, they were, of a class above everybody else. And we tend to judge Lizzie Borden and her memory by today's standards. And you can't do that. You have to go by the way things were in 1892 and then take that, the way that it is. Then you can judge for yourself. But I just don't believe that. One day she just decides I'm going to hack up my parents and that's it. She was spoiled. They had a farm. Not only that, physically, Lizzie Borden was only 5'2". She had broken both of her arms 3 months earlier.
How'd she do that? Do you know?
A dumbwaiter accident.
Oh.
At the church that she was volunteering Sunday school at. They asked her to get a tray out of the dumbwaiter. It was open. She put her arms in thinking the dumbwaiter was still there. It came down and crashed on her arms.
Wow.
And she broke both arms. She didn't have the physical strength.
Never heard that before.
She didn't have the mentality. She didn't have the physical strength. And she didn't have the time to commit the crime. Now, once again, that being said, absolutely, she could have done it. There's, nobody will ever know. But I think all things considered, it's a little more, I would, if I were on the jury, I would definitely vote not guilty.
Well, most murders are love or money, and there was money.
Yeah.
So,
no, but you know what? These girls already had money.
Yeah. I'm talking about for the uncle. I'm buying
the uncle was the one. The uncle was the one. He had every reason. Not only that, you have to understand, this guy was a former butcher.
Oh.
And he was known to go around the week before the murders, to go around to different farms trying to hire someone. Who was he trying to hire? Many suspects. Many suspects. So I think once you take that into consideration and you understand the political and economical reason why Lizzie Borden was charged, then you say, the city really didn't have a choice. The city was being pressured by the public and by the newspapers. And nothing like that had ever happened. They were overwhelmed. And the police had the spotlight on them. And these were not, police like we know today. These were guys that were just appointed because they knew somebody. And now the public's saying, you got to do something. There's a guy running around with a hatchet killing people. So to calm the public down, they said, well, if we pick her, then people aren't going to panic. And it's basically what they did.
Awesome. Is Maplecroft open? Is that a museum?
No,
or
it's
is
a
it
private
residence? Okay.
But I have in the pamphlet with the cemetery, I also have several other Lizzie Borden places. The address of Maplecroft. Just are you guys driving?
Yes.
Yeah, just put it into your GPS, and Maplecroft is right there. Her attorney, Andrew Jennings, his mansion is right down the street. Also, we have Battleship Cove here in Fall River. I put down Lizzie Borden, the address of Lizzie Borden Swansea Farm. So you can check out all those places. It's wonderful.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, sir, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I could stand here and listen to you all day.
Very
Thank you
interesting.
so incredibly
What is your
much.
name?